Hi, everyone. My name is Pauline Nicofase, and I'm one of the DIM board members. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm an African American female wearing a red blouse and a navy blue blazer. So before we begin our first panel of the day, we would like to highlight one of the abstracts that we felt outstandingly exemplified the theme of this panel, which is titled Partnering with the Community. This panel will speak to how we address health equity by working within and partnering with different communities. So I'd like to introduce Devon Cassidy, who will be giving a brief presentation on her work titled A State of Emergency, Access to Dialysis for Undocumented Immigrants in Michigan.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So, hi, my name is Devon Cassidy. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm a third-year medical student at the University of Michigan. I'm going to be speaking today about a trainee-level advocacy project that I began about 2 years ago, and it specifically is about renal replacement therapy coverage for undocumented patients in the state of Michigan. I have no disclosures. However, I would like to share that I feel strongly that access to care is a human right and one that should not be tied to one's citizenship. So I'm going to start with a patient case. We'll call the patient Mateo for today. He's a 25-year-old father of two and an agricultural worker in Michigan. And one day he receives the news that his kidneys are failing. As his condition worsens, he presents to his local hospital and his condition rapidly improves with treatment. But then he's told on discharge that he would need weekly dialysis to stay alive. However, he is undocumented. What do you think the standard of care will look like for patients like him? Since its inception in 1973, over 1 million people have received life-saving renal replacement therapy under Medicare Unstaged Renal Replacement Program. However, undocumented immigrants are a subset of patients that lack this coverage. So what does this mean for our patient, Mateo? He's a 25-year-old with idiopathic kidney failure, and he's sent home with no dialysis plan. Over the following months, he shows up to different EDs, fluid overloaded, feeling as if he's drowning. He keeps a high-risk central line way past when it should have, and he keeps getting weaker and he can't work to support his family. This is what this problem looks like across the US. In most states, including Michigan, there was no option for routine renal replacement for undocumented patients. There were 12 states plus DC that had implemented some combination of Medicaid waivers. And then of these, California and Illinois had specific mechanisms to cover renal transplantation, which is the gold standard of treatment. This has been a problem for a really long time. Qualitative investigations have proved extreme distress, the fear of dying, and families falling apart. This process is also challenging for providers, and least important ethically, but most important fiscally, this is very expensive to cover these patients as emergencies. The costs associated with emergency dialysis are up to 3 times higher than just covering these patients as routine dialysis. So I learned of these systemic issues while working with local immigration attorneys and began investigating what change would look like. We quickly realized that most recent work had been published by the same person, Dr. Lilia Cervantes, who is in Colorado. She created a roadmap for systemic engagement for change, and she joined our group as a mentor. From here, we tried to figure out what it would look like to improve the care ecosystem for patients in the state of Michigan. Our goal was to change the state Michigan Medicaid manual to include ESKD as an emergency medical condition. We started by putting together a long-form policy brief and this one-pager, which is the communication currency of legislators and policymakers. And I began working with another medical student pictured here, Amalia Gomez Rexroad, and on mentorship and Valeria Valbuena, who became a leader on the project. We then gathered a coalition. From the start, the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center was our biggest community champion. Amalia, who's a native Spanish speaker, put together an interview guide in Spanish that we used to elicit testimony from some of our patients, including Mateo, and we used that as media engagement documents. We had formal advocacy coalition meetings pictured here. We identify our stakeholders, next steps, community partners, including the National Kidney Foundation, Michigan Hospital Association, Michigan Elder Justice Initiative, who had close contacts with the Michigan Medicaid director. And after a lot of discussions with the Michigan Medicaid office and tireless advocacy from our coalition, they finally decided to approve this ESO regulatory change and include ESKD as an emergency medical condition to cover all dialysis treatment in the state, regardless of residency status. Writing this change took several more months, and it was issued on December 29th, 2021, and will become effective in only a few weeks on April 1st this year. I'd now like to share a few lessons I learned in this advocacy process. First, no problem is too big. I was uncertain to take on this level of an issue as a medical student. However, I had a lot of encouragement and support of mentors that making changes possible at any level of your training, which was my lesson number 2. Additionally, this process involved being very persistent. We celebrated small progress every step of the way and refused to be frustrated by many shut doors. Overall, advocacy is all about making a difference for the patients. And we were able to celebrate that Mateo, our patient, his green card application, which was sponsored by his wife, was approved. And he's the perfect candidate for a kidney transplantation. But in the state of Michigan, there are currently no mechanisms to make that happen. Not yet. So our advocacy journey is never over. We'll continue to fight for equitable healthcare for all. We're extremely proud of this small step that we've made in obtaining dialysis access and hope to make that happen in every state. Hope to expand access to kidney transplant and coverage for other health issues, regardless of status. Thank you to everyone who's involved in this community-wide effort that can't be pictured on one slide, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. So now we'll transition over to our panel for the day. Please note that we will hold all questions until the Q&A section of this panel. So I'd first like to introduce our 3 panelists. First, Dr. Italo Brown. He is an assistant professor in emergency medicine and health equity and social justice curriculum lead at Stanford University School of Medicine. Throughout his career, he has been at the front lines of social medicine and health equity. He is the current Chief Impact Officer of TRAP Medicine, a barbershop-based wellness initiative that leverages the cultural capital of barbershops to address the physical and emotional health of Black men and boys. He also serves as a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant for organizations like Google and YouTube. Recently, he was selected to be among clinician leaders in access to care for the Recurring Health Equity Leaders Roundtable, a new initiative by the Office of Public Engagement in the White House. Our second panelist is Ms. Lauren Wooten. She is a 4th-year medical student at Georgetown University, applying into pediatrics. She's an award-winning activist, co-founder of DC COVID Sitters, and the current president of the American Medical Women's Association Student Division. And our third panelist will be Dr. Tammy Chang. She is a health services researcher and practicing family physician with a passion for adolescent health, specifically breaking the cycle of poverty and poor health among adolescent mothers and their children via community-engaged research. She also serves as a director of the Health Behavior Optimization for Michigan Collaborative Quality Initiative, which is a statewide clinical quality improvement initiative with funding and support from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. She has received national awards, including the Academy Health Presidential Scholarship for New Health Services Researchers, the North American Primary Care Research Group Distinguished Trainee Award, and the Society of Teachers of Family Medicine Distinguished Paper Award. So with that being said, I'd like to thank our panelists and welcome them once again to our first panel of the day. We do have a series of set questions that we would like to ask, and then we'll open it up at the end for a Q&A. So our first question to our panelists is, can you share a little bit about your experiences working with community partners in your respective fields?
I try not to jump out there and speak first. And with respect to my panelists, this will be the last time I'll speak first. I want to go ahead and give everyone else the opportunity. I would be remiss to say that, I mean, this is an amazing event, and I'm so proud to share information around community engaged work with you all today. So the experience dealing with community partners in terms of barbershop-based interventions is pretty unique, right? Like, you can't just walk into some communities and automatically gain credibility. You have to build relationships. And what we've been able to do essentially is foster relationships over time by continuously engaging not just the shop owners, but the patrons. We never walked in saying, hey, we want to do this. We want to come here and set up an entire health experience and try to improve the health of your patients, because doing that may be a little bit off-putting. It may have caused some tension because, again, who are we to them? What kind of credibility have we built? Especially when you're dealing with a community that is as tight-knit and that has unique historical historical ties to medical mistrust or to mistrust of healthcare providers. So one of the things that we've been very successful at doing is establishing rapport, coming with resources, being transparent with what our intentions are, not pushing the research envelope, and making sure that they understood they were stakeholders throughout the entire thing. We weren't just, setting a table, we were bringing the table to them. They were at the table, helped design it, and all of the above.
This is Tammy Chang. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you guys so much for allowing me to join by phone. It is an incredible pleasure to be here and be with these great speakers. And I think one of the things I want to just right off the bat say is that as an academician, it's so easy to fall into this idea that we're the experts, that we've got the papers, we got the research, we got the grants, and we know what's going on. In my training as a health services researcher and in my work as a family doctor, I think one of the things I had to work really hard to do is get back to my roots and remember why I even wanted to be a doctor. And that means living in the communities that I serve and being in the same organizations and the same scenarios as the people that I'm trying to help. Because honestly, in academia, we know so little. Our view of what the world looks like is completely skewed, and the papers are really old. And so one of the things I love is this idea that, all of the medical students that I worked with have come from such wonderful backgrounds of, diversity and both geographical and cultural, and they have this burning fire. And the things I sometimes worry about is how medical school extinguishes that fire instead of bringing that to the forefront and saying, hey, that's an amazing skill, talent, or experience. How do we use that to better understand how we can help people? Because I think ultimately that's our goal. And so, in our work, we do a lot of different statewide initiatives, policy initiatives, but one of the easiest ways for me to explain the way that I actually apply this idea that community comes first is a story about My Voice, which is, for some people who might know about it, but it's a national poll of youth. And what we do is we poll young people to get a sense of what's actually going on with them. We call that their lived experience. And the reason why that's so important is because policies across the board typically miss the mark on young people. It's mostly adults like me telling other adults what we think young people need. And what happens is that we make these crazy laws, policies, and practices that a lot of times don't serve young people. So, early on in my career, I was like, that's whack. We need to actually hear from what young people are doing, experiencing, and needing from themselves, and then bringing them to the table. So I'm going to stop there. I feel like there's going to be lots of great questions, but I wanted to at least jump in and say hello, that I'm so excited to be here, and not just here today, but for many of you who are from the University of Michigan or not, I want you to know that please reach out to us. I hope that in this time of COVID and virtual that you see this as a way of networking and expanding your web of people who believe in many of the same things you do, because I know that's how I've been successful in my career.
Thank you, Dr. Chang.
And hi, I'm Lauren. So I'm a fourth year med student. I'm in DC, and in terms of working with community partners, I think community partnerships are kind of like an extra step beyond what we think of typical community service. I think people especially when we're students, we think like, I'm going to go into a community and provide a service. But usually that doesn't involve like acknowledging or asking even what the community needs, which is a mainstay and like a very important part of having a community partnership. In terms of my personal work, community partnerships are a really big part of my advocacy and activism work locally. I think unfortunately it's not a mainstay of advocacy work in medicine, though it should be. I've worked primarily with mutual aid organizations, which for folks who don't know, mutual aid is like a voluntary reciprocal exchange of resources and services run by community members themselves to help their own community. So for instance, I live in DC and our city is broken up into 8 wards, and each ward has a mutual aid group that provides services and access to basic necessities like groceries, neighborhood cleanups, things like that. That's primarily what I've done, working with mutual aid organizations to get them access to basic necessities, but also recently through the pandemic, PPE.
Thank you. Another question we have is, what do you find are the most important factors to keep in mind when partnering with community members? Anyone can feel free to answer this question.
I would say the biggest thing is like, it's really not an opportunity for you to practice your skills in a vulnerable community. I think an issue that I have with medical schools and medical institutions in general is the concept of free student clinics, which really take advantage of vulnerable communities under the guise of partnering with the community. So I think like having collaboration, acknowledging, doing needs assessments to find out what people actually need, and then identifying your skills, what you can bring to the table and saying, I'm here to help you. How can I help you, support you, reach the goals that you want to have? It's not me coming in saying, it looks like you need X, Y, and Z. I can provide that to you. And then I think also, as Dr. Chang mentioned, I think it was Dr. Chang mentioned, we as quote unquote experts with different letters after our names are not necessarily experts in the community. People have lived experience, and their lived experience is just as equally important, if not more important, than what we have learned in academia.
I think it's more important than what we've learned in academia.
Yeah.
I would have to say that, you know, the majority of the quote unquote solutions that my project and advocacy have been successful in, those came from the community. And so the work is so different. I love that the other panels are talking about this. The work is so different, and I don't think we get very good training on it. It's almost like the things that we have to kind of get back to about being human, right? Like we can't go somewhere and try. I can't even get my kids to do things, right? Like I can't make anybody do anything. But what I love is being authentic and real and present with lots of the groups that I am really, really passionate about. And for me, as someone who grew up in Flint and saw a lot of trauma and just disadvantage among young people, it really got me just so inspired to see how resilient young people could be. But does that mean I know, as a 41-year-old Asian woman, what young people today need? No, that's nuts to think that. And so what does that look like for me is that I spend as much time as I can with young people, listening to them. They don't need to know I'm a doctor. They don't need to know I'm from U of M, but spending time with them, understanding what's going on with them. And like a lot of the panelists said, building trust and building this shared experience and understanding. And from that, a lot of times I tell them, you know, I'm having trouble with this. I'm trying to do this. Like, what do you guys think about that? And they'll be like, that's stupid. That's not useful. And I'll be like, okay, what do you think would be useful? And it's not fancy conversations, and it's not a fancy seminar or a focus group, and there's not, you know, a set venue. It's like being in the community as an authentic community member and seeing your constituents and your patients and your whatever you want to call them. I call them my community members, you know, as equals. And when that happens, it's so magic. It's so magic. It's almost like all this time we've trained young people in medical school to kind of speak a new language and see ourselves in a different light. Well, actually, we're all human at the end. And how do we get back to that? I think that that's really hard. And I think we need to give people permission to do that. It doesn't need to be fancy, and you don't need to talk fancy. No one understands that.
I completely agree with what both of my colleagues have said here. Things that I would add on is got to have patience. This is walking into someone's space protected community and automatically believing that because you have some perceived social capital that you're going to be accepted is unrealistic, but also thinking that they need you. That's not really the reality for them. They've been doing what they've been doing longer than you've been doing what you've been doing. So kind of having that piece of humble pie in going in and having patience to see how you are accepted in that space is critical. The other thing I think is, I mentioned earlier, transparency is key, but it's really the fact that they can sniff out, or that our communities can sniff out, false intentions a mile away. If you come, people have been played over and over again. And so by this time, there is definitely a keen ability to tell when someone is being honest and genuine versus when somebody just wants to extract something from them. So I think that is highly important, to lead with transparency, to be aware of yourself and aware of the space that you take up in their space. And that's potentially obtrusive or intrusive rather. And I think that the last thing I'd say is, when you, like, no two communities are the same. They have very unique qualities, and you can't take the same approach to every single one. So really taking time to build a tailored approach with the community members that you engage, and in continuing to reaffirm that they are driving this, they are a part of this conversation, and clearly steering where this goes. Those are the things that I just keep in the front of my mind every time I engage communities.
Yeah, I love that so much. I think it's so great, because I think we all know that people's bullshit meter is like very well attuned.
That part.
We don't,
Yes.
right?
And I think, like, in order to do that work, you really have to make sure that you are in the community, listening to what people need, that you have done your research in terms of what the community is facing, and that you're not just going in there, I'm a doctor, I have X, Y, and Z information, here I am. You need to know what they actually need and what their goals are.
You have to also, I would say this is kind of an interesting thing, but as a practitioner, having tough skin has been something I've developed, because I've fallen flat on my face before. I've walked into those spaces and been like, oh, I'm going to be the Black guy who is kind of young. I'm going to tell them I'm a doctor, and they're going to be like, oh, he's like my young cousin, and they're going to automatically like me. And that hasn't happened before. When I tried doing this in the Bronx, they basically clowned me. They made fun of me and laughed me out of the barbershop. But what happened was, I came back the next day and they were like, oh, it's the doc. And they laughed again. But eventually I just kept telling them, like, you matter to me. I'm here not for anything personal. And if you choose to not even be involved in the work that I would like to do here, that's great. Just be honest with me. And that tough skin and realizing that failure is a part of this process helped me to really develop keen insight on that.
Yes, Dr.
That was so.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I was just gonna say that the normalization of the failures, it doesn't matter how much you care. I have had so many experiences like that too. So I just want to add, so that people don't think it's just a normal thing to, you care so much, but you're not perfect, and that's okay. And that patience that Dr. Brown's talking about, that authentic being there, it's not like being there one time kind of thing. Like, if you actually really care, you're there every week, you're there all the time, that you're and it's okay to do or say the wrong thing. I think that's I'm so glad that you brought that up.
And that also brings me to the next question. You all have done so much work in your respective communities as activists. And so what are some things that you all have learned from your greatest failures in these partnerships within your communities? And what are some of your greatest successes?
this is Dr. Chang again. I'll just say one of the things that I've learned over and over again is that no matter how easy we make it to work with us, we are a burden. We are a burden. And that's something that I feel at a lot, which is I'm coming in, it's like, I want to talk about this, but people don't want to talk about that, right? Well, let's do this. It's like, nobody wants to do that. Or they'll be like, I want to do it, but I can't do the 10 steps that you want. And that's the thing that I think I fail a lot at, is saying, I feel like this might be helpful, because one of the things I think is unfair is to ask community members to be policymakers, or ask community members to be, more than they want or need to be. And when we have those expectations, we have to remember, I have to remember, like, this is burdensome. Just them having interact with you is burdensome, it's extra. And so how do I make it so that when I do anything, including research or programs, that I recognize their time is valuable, their energy is valuable, their resources are valuable, and not to overburden them. And there's a lot of, it goes very deep, everything to like IRB saying, oh, you're giving them too much money, it's coercive. I think that's crazy. That means that you value their time less, that their time is worth less money. That's completely nuts to me. And so, it's this balance of like, how do I do the absolute lowest burden thing to help them do what they want to do their way? And I've definitely failed a lot with that. And I would say one of my greatest successes is over time, over a long, long time, creating a very strong, I was about to say sense of community, but to be more specific, sense of trust and like genuine friendship. And that's something that I treasure forever. And those are where a lot of what I would call the magic happens, where people can be honest and say, you know what, this is what I think that might be really helpful, or this is the thing that's actually going on. I wasn't going to tell you, but, and that's really, really magical, where you're like, whoa, that's like when you have a huge knot and then somebody like pulls the string and everything just like comes apart, so it's not a knot anymore. That's what it feels like. But it takes a really long time, but that's probably one of the things I'm most proud of.
No, I agree with that. I agree with what she said fully. There's a couple of things that come to my mind for failures. Some of the narratives that I've been, able to kind of like carry are extremely impactful for me. But I remember one time that I was working with a young man who was coming to the barbershop. He was listening, he was engaged, and it felt like I was breaking ground with him and his father. And then it eventually, the son ended up getting he was arrested. And I was just like, man, I thought we were getting somewhere. And speaking to the father, he was like, it's not your fault. And him saying that really liberated me from this feeling like, all right, man, I was trying my hardest and trying to carry the world and trying to move this entire, boulder, realizing that I had to give myself grace too in the process. That like sometimes the problems that we're trying to correct are very deep and ingrained, and we can't always expect to walk in and like a light switch, flip on the change that we desire to see. So that failure allowed me to understand, like, give yourself some grace in this process. You're going to see things that you try land flat. And then some of the things that you try are going to absolutely take hold. The other thing that I was going to say is I've felt at times that I've had to relearn how to communicate. When you walk into a space and you're like, man, I've been a Black man my entire life. And then I walk in a room full of other Black men. I know how to approach that. I've gone to so many different events and social gatherings and safe spaces. I thought I knew how to navigate every single one of them. And I've watched people literally say, like, he is a clown, or he doesn't sound like the people from my community. And I used to take that very personally, because I said, man, how am I going to really land? How am I going to get this information across? How am I going to be able to have conversations that are open and honest if I can't even get past the door, if I can't even have a language that they identify with? And what I've really learned at the end of the day is they see those intentions and those actions. And so the eternal return in a person, that desire to be like, I'm still here, I'm going to work through it, that is a win for me. That is the success, is feeling how that once it unlocks the person, or unlocks that community, you start to feel like, all right, this is why I did it. And it is so reaffirming. The last thing I'll say is a huge success in this work, specifically dealing with barbershop-based health interventions, is that there are so many other people across the nation doing it. And these practices, it's like a community within a community. You're able to share these successes. You're able to synergize and come up with better strategies and inform one another about how to move in those spaces. And I never thought that would be something I'd have access to, was like a warm community of people who are doing similar things and experiencing the exact same failures that I'm experiencing, and the wins as well.
I would echo what both of my fellow panelists said, definitely. Some of my biggest struggles have been like just not having any exposure or training to this work at all, and trying to jump in and do it without knowing how to do it. You end up stepping on toes. You end up trying to create something that already exists. You can effectively harm the community without really trying. Thankfully, I have not seen that happen with me, but that, and then also I was going to add, like, being taken seriously by the stakeholders when you're working with the partners, to help them advocate for themselves, to like financial stakeholders or larger stakeholders outside of the community, like in order to get their goals met. It's hard sometimes to be taken seriously, especially as a young Black woman, as a student, as whatever identifier you want to put in. That has been a big challenge for me. And I would say, like, successes, definitely trust, getting that trust with the community, getting them to acknowledge and welcome you as a member of their community. Yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest thing: trust and relationships.
Thank you all so much. So we have a few questions so far in the Q&A panel. Our first question is basically to Drs. Brown and Ms. Lauren. Someone would like for you to discuss the pieces of art that you have behind you. What do they mean to you? And can you just talk about what they mean to you, I guess?
Sure. Well, there's a picture of my cat. This is just like Disney women cartoons from Disney movies, not really super impactful. This is Black Voices in Healthcare, was a podcast that I helped co-produce through The Nocturnists. It's available on Apple Podcasts, but it was created during the pandemic as a way to hear from Black healthcare workers around the world, as we were grappling with, well, really around the country, I think, as we were grappling with the murder of George Floyd, but also with experiencing the pandemic. And it was recorded and produced in 2020.
All right, you guys caught me on a good day. This is I'm going to give you all a master tip. So this painting behind, or this print behind me, I actually interchange. I have a bunch of different ones. Yeah, it's Velcro. It's affixed to the wall with Velcro. And so depending on how I'm feeling that day, I can swap out another image. But this one I've been using for the last probably 2 weeks. A buddy of mine sent me an image on Instagram, and it was a very provocative image of a young man, essentially with a bunch of different influences, an array of influences around him, a young Black man. And I mean, some of them are, drugs, some of them are, scholarship books. Some things are, I think there's a diploma there. There's a officer holding a gun. And so all of those different influences essentially having a real effect on the psyche of a young Black male is something that I identified with. And I thought it would just be a very, soul-stirring image to have. Right. So that was a part of that. And things on the left essentially are, I'm a member of a fraternity. I also have representation there. I also have the books that I am most, I would say, actively trying to have people engage with. So I have a lot of books, but I only put the ones up behind me that I'm like, hey, you should absolutely read these. One of them I have here, the 1619 Project. The other one is Dilla Time, a book about Jay Dilla.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Hopefully we can get a list of those books that you have and share with our attendees later on. So we also have Ms. Cassidy here for anyone who would like to address questions directly to her. I will read one other question that I have from an attendee. And they said, curious if any of the panelists know of any successful partnerships between mutual aid and hospital/academia. Sounds like healthcare could stand to learn a lot from MA about how to get away from top-down approaches to community benefit.
That's a tough one. So here's the issue. We spoke a little bit about it earlier, but I don't want to just blanket call it red tape, but there's a lot of hurdles when you start to bring in different aid in an institution, right? And I'll probably talk about this a little bit later during my keynote, but institutions can be somewhat of a ball and chain and a hurdle in terms of trying to impact a community altogether. Whereas an aid group may be giving you certain types of resources or access to resources, I feel like when I've had to justify my involvement with an institution, it's led to other questions. It's been a significant detractor for some of the communities that I go in. And I'll be very transparent, okay? So I'm currently at Stanford, and I tried to initiate barbershop-based health interventions in East Palo Alto. Now, Palo Alto and East Palo Alto are separated by a highway. Literally, you can drive past this highway. On my way to work, I come from the East Bay, which is, I would say, has greater diversity than Palo Alto, right? As I drive in, I pass, community centers, a bunch of food marts. There's a McDonald's on the corner. There's some churches. There's some, a couple of open play spaces, but nothing like what it looks like as soon as I cross that bridge. I get over the highway and it's like mansions and, tech hubs and working spaces or co-working spaces. All of that happens, right? Now, when I tried to enter East Palo Alto to have these discussions, a lot of times there was a hesitation once they heard I worked at Stanford. It felt as though I was going to bring some harm their way, because that community has been existing there longer than I've been there and hasn't had a ton of investment from that institution. And so that brings back trauma to whomever may exist in that community. They may have had a poor experience at the hospital. They may have once been, engaged by someone before who essentially extracted resources or extracted whatever and published about them without them being engaged in the conversation altogether. So just recognize that in trying to bring institutions to the community, even if you have the backing of an aid source, you're essentially bringing whatever trauma comes with that institution to the table.
I would agree with that. And I think it's a great question having as a student. So I actually took the opportunity to ask during my residency interviews how programs actually partnered with the community. And to be honest, no one had an actually good answer outside of we send residents to this clinic where we serve the underserved communities. Like, that is the standard answer. And that is literally like an institution placing a clinic in a community and providing healthcare without an actual partnership. So I'm not actually familiar with any good examples. I hope they exist somewhere. But I think it speaks to the lack of a general acceptance of community members in academia in general, but especially academic healthcare, as experts in their experience, because of the hierarchical nature of academia and the narrow way in which we define expertise. There is a sense that we know what's best. And so we don't need to partner with someone because we know what's best. We've done the research, we've been published, we have done X, Y, and Z, when actually we've been healthcare equity, health equity tourists all along. So I don't know of a good example. I hope they exist. I don't know if Dr. Chang knows, but.
I think that everything that our panelists have said is I agree with. I think I'm really encouraged because I see a lot of movement towards incorporating more community resources, and that just the openness of our rigid ivory towers, you know, that I feel like that movement towards saying, yes, understanding social determinants is important, and yes, we should leverage the gifts that our community brings, and yes, we should ask about these things, is a start. Now, do we know how to do it? Probably are. I actually think there might be some, like health leads. I think that that's kind of a cool example, but I don't think it's done systematically. I don't think that there's a gold standard, but the idea that people are warming up to the idea is so encouraging to me, especially after being in academia for so long, to see how many ideas are shut down or ridiculed or, you know, just not taken seriously. The fact that this in the last 5 years has really gained traction just means it's an area that we need young people and trainees and, you know, all of us to kind of rally around and say, yes, finally, yes. You know, what about this idea? What about that idea? But I'll go back to what Dr. Brown has said. It's like we need to be ready and expect that we might fail sometimes here because we're learning. We're all learning, and that that's okay. And for us not to give up and to say, yes, it is appropriate, because even in our own group, we've asked young people, do you think it's appropriate for your doctor to ask you about things like food insecurity or any part of your social health? And as a family doctor, I mean, it's a big part of what we do. But we didn't know what young people would say. And what young people said overwhelmingly was, yes, it's like a direct quote. It's like, it's a massive part of my physical health. Of course they should ask. And the biggest surprising finding from that study that I can't forget about is that they didn't even expect healthcare to solve the problems per se. This is young people, 14 to 24. They just wanted healthcare providers in the system to listen. And I think that, you know what, that's free, right? We could definitely do that. And if we can actually connect people with social resources, how amazing would that be? And it just means we need to start moving in that direction and supporting those people who are doing it. It's exciting to me.
Tammy, you said something that I thought was so critical here, is essentially this idea that you just have to listen. You know, you really just have to listen. And that, I think, is a message that can be passed in a variety of directions, right? Like, we know that as developing providers, listening is our currency. Like, that's the way that we get to really impact our patients. But that's also the way that you tap into communities, is by going into those spaces and listening. And in trying to engage institutions, sometimes I find that there's a reluctance for them to just listen to you share what you're trying to say, or what narratives you're bringing from the community spaces that you've been engaging. And so don't be discouraged if they don't understand it off the bat. You may take multiple rounds of trying to show or demonstrate the value of the work that you're doing to an institution to get them on board. It's because there is a barrier for them to listen. You know, they automatically are looking at ways that this could potentially, change their optics or change their position, or is this an opportunity to grow through research or something that a secondary agenda that may not be in alignment with what you're trying to accomplish. But the moment they start to listen is when you actually have the greatest opportunity to get that partnership with your institution in a way that you define it, or that is defined by the community members and what they seek.
And I just want to add that project was led and is led by Claire Chang, who's a medical student at the University of Michigan. And those insights are coming directly from the community, from young people. And so I just am constantly bombarded by the reminder that, the answer doesn't come from the quote unquote experts, and, it's coming from the community. And so I'm hoping to be able to share that with you all, because you might not hear that from everybody, but you're going to hear it from us.
So our next question is directed towards our medical students, Lauren and Devin. And the question is, how do you find opportunities to get involved in existing initiatives in order to learn how to start initiatives or learn where there are gaps to address?
So I think like the first step is identifying what specifically you want to do. There's a cause for everyone. Everyone can find a cause. And then Google is free. Google is a great tool to use to find what organizations exist in your city. And you can find out who you want to contact, reaching out and saying, I love the work you're doing. I'm interested in doing that work. Is there some way that I can partner with you? Or is there some way that I could be of service to you? I think is a great start.
Yeah, I completely agree. I got really involved with the work I was in by volunteering with another student organization doing medical evaluations for people seeking asylum in the US. And that's how I connected with the immigrant attorneys that then kind of were expressing what was going on with their clients struggling to get dialysis. I was involved in transplantation research. So it was all these different interests of mine that all connected. So I think having this passion for something that exists that will kind of drive forward this huge project or something that you want to take on. Because like for mine, it was many years in the making. And I think everyone that takes on something that's a community-wide project is something you're really going to pour yourself into. So it's hard to kind of like just find something on the side. It's not a little like research paper you can write and publish. It's something that you want to really have a huge passion for and have found kind of organically through things that you already love and know that you want to make a change in.
And I'll say like when I started DC COVID Sitters, it was very much like, I've been a babysitter before. I noticed all of the daycares and the schools in the city have closed and the government isn't doing anything. So let me see if there are any organizations that are doing this work in the city. There aren't. So let me reach out to other students because I know all the other students are also free. Let's try and figure out how we can fill this niche in a sustainable and equitable way to provide a service to a community that needs it, hopefully temporarily, which it was thankfully, so that they can take care of our community during a pandemic. So just put it out there.
Thank you guys so much. I think it's very important to follow your passion and create initiatives based on that. We really appreciate all the work you guys do. And so, Lauren, you touched a bit about challenges being taken seriously as a medical student along with other intersecting identities. How do you both, Lauren and Devin, both as female medical students, advocate for yourselves? And do you have any tips to share?
So for me in this project, I found being a medical student was actually really helpful because for me, I knew going into it, I was not the expert in this area and I was really excited to learn. And as I shared Dr. Cervantes, I like very quickly doing just a literature review and research, Google, I found there's a lot of people doing this work in other states have succeeded. And then in the state of Michigan, I knew there were attorneys who had been fighting for their clients, these patients for years, and year after year, we're trying to get exemptions for these patients to be able to get dialysis. So I was not the expert and these people had been fighting for it, but I happened to be a medical student who had time, passion for this, and then was going to try to get a lot of mentors and the resources of an institution behind me. So I thought that was actually an identity that helped me a lot in this scenario. And I kind of used it as I'm here to learn from everyone else that has been doing this and use the resources that I have at hand to help me throughout it.
Yeah, I would say it helps to be a member of the community that you're trying to help and that you're trying to partner with. In terms of the struggles that I've had, it's been really bringing in institutional stakeholders and having them take the issue seriously. It's helpful to identify yourself as myself as a liaison between the two. You know, I'm from this city. I know I'm a part of the community. I've talked to people and I understand what they need. And I'm trying to share that information with you in your role as whatever your title is at this institution. And they need your support to get this done. But it can be really challenging. I think like having confidence, being prepared, and just acknowledging that you, like Devin said, you don't know everything, you're here to learn, but there are some things that you do know. And I think like medical school, unfortunately, sometimes can beat into us that we need to second guess ourselves, that we may not know what we know. But being confident in what you've learned, what you bring to the table, and the fact that you are advocating on behalf of other people.
Thank you guys so much. Drs. Brown and Dr. Chang, have you guys experienced any issues with your identity and sorry, I missed the question. We're actually going to be wrapping up pretty soon, so you guys can just go ahead and say last few words before we transition to the next panel, which will be our Data to Drive Solutions panel.
I'll be brief. Go ahead, Tammy.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Brown. I'm so sorry. I'll just say that one of the things is that gives me confidence and strength and courage is exactly what the last panelist said, which is I just remind myself I'm not asking, you know, the institution or other people for things for myself. Like if it was that, I just wouldn't do it. I remind myself I'm working this hard and I'm asking and I'm advocating and I'm, you know, negotiating for people who often don't have a seat at the table. And that gives me the kind of courage to do things that I would never, you know, do or advocate for myself, but for other people. And I think that that's one of the things that medical students, especially, you can remember, be bold. You know, what do you have to lose? Nothing. They'll just say no to you, which they would have, you know, like that you would be just back where you were before. And I, even now in my current position, sometimes get really scared. I'm like, oh my gosh, what if I say this? Or it's like, no, I'm going to say it because it's not for me. It's for a much greater cause than me. And I want to give people permission and just to say I'm so inspired by you all. And thank you so much again for having me on this panel.
I am equally cross-inspired by this, and I'll make my comments brief. Everyone has said it here. Essentially, just be a vessel, right? Be a vessel. Be able to help individuals translate those needs across a gradient and bring resources with you, okay? And then I think the last thing I would say is you want to leave tracks. You need to leave tracks so that others understand what happened, how it occurred, how they can do it, and be a complete transparent person or transparent individual rather in how you share that information. You know, I think that the moment you remove yourself from the situation and remove yourself from the work that you're doing and truly embrace that this is work that needed to be done and you're just a person helping that cause, and showing others how to do it, you really unlock the true potential of others, specifically those who are seeking insight, seeking knowledge on how to do this. So leave those tracks. And again, it's been an honor to speak with you all today.
That's a hard one to follow, but I'll just say, like, I think the goal overall should be becoming a part of the community. If you're not, achieving collaboration and striving to help our community members support themselves to advocate for the things that they need by providing the tools. And yeah, thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you all so much for spending time with us today, for sharing your experiences, sharing your knowledge. You've truly inspired all of us. So with that being said, we're going to transition over to our next panel.